your screen, Dr. Prasanna. In the meantime, you can start sharing the screen. It's 8 o'clock now.
Yeah.
So hereby convene this glaucoma papers 2 meeting, and I request Dr. Suchanda sir to preside over the proceedings. And at the outset,
Yes,
let us welcome Dr. Prasanna Venkatesh. He shall be speaking on characteristics of BMO MRW in normal suspects and glaucoma patients among South Indian population. Dr. Prasanna?
Yes, sir. Can the host pin me?
Please proceed.
Yes, sir. Can the host pin me so that I'm using a green mat, sir? There is no screen sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the host can pin me. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Characteristics, shall I start, sir?
Yes.
Can I just start with a brief introduction, if you please permit, sir?
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So, hello and good morning. Welcome to the 79th conference, 79th AIOC National Conference. Good morning, respected delegates, doctors and faculty members. To get this session started, I would request the chairpersons to unmute and switch on the camera, starting with Dr. Suchanda Sar, Co-Chairman Dr. Manish Shantilal Shah, Convener Dr. Manoj Chandra Mathur, Co-Convener Dr. Jakhar Ajib, Moderator Professor Dr. Sumit Sachdeva, Moderator Dr. Parik Rajul. Please let me know, sir, if some of our doctors are not here.
Except for Dr. Vinay, I think everyone, Dr. Jakhar is also not there.
Rajul, please start. We can't wait.
Yeah.
Just go on.
So Dr. Prasanna Venkatesh, please, can you
Yes, sir.
start with your
I
presentation?
request the host to pin me so that I can just start, sir. Yeah. Thank you. Shall I begin, sir?
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Yes, sir. Characteristics of BMO MRW in normal suspects glaucoma patients among South Indian population. So what is already known as the Brooks membrane opening minimum rim width is a novel morphometric assessment tool for the evaluation of glaucoma. The mean deviation of the visual fields correlates better with the Brooks membrane opening minimum rim width than the horizontal rim width. Similarly, the RNFL thickness also correlates better with the BMO MRW than with the horizontal rim width. It is already known. There are many papers on it suggesting there's a blue arrow C, which is the BMO MRW, and why we need to change from horizontal rim width to BMO MRW. So the normal disc will have a green arrow which is seen in all the quadrants, and in a glaucomatous infratemporal notch, as is seen, there is a constricted BMO MRW. The purpose of this study is to study the characteristics of BMO MRW with respect to the disc size, that is the BMO area, among different group of people, that is normal suspects and primary glaucoma patients. What influence the BMO area has on the BMO MRW and RNFL. So the Brooks membrane minimum rim width is the smallest distance between the green internal limiting membrane and the red Brooks membrane opening. So our study, we involved 40 normalized, 40 glaucoma suspect, 40 POAG and 40 PSEG eyes. Consenting consecutive patients from November to December 2019 were included. The exclusion criteria involved avoiding severe defects in view of glaucomatic optic atrophy. So the results were tabulated as follows. The green box depicting that all the patients were actually age matched, and initially the data was not divided into a large and small BMO area as depicted by this red box. The results were as follows. The mean BMO MRW and RNFL, if you see, it's higher in the normal group as expected, and the suspect, it was slightly lesser. 243 it was normal, 229 in the suspects. As we go down, it is even more lesser in the primary open angle and primary angle closure glaucoma group. The ROC analysis was done to evaluate the diagnostic precision, whether it was better in the MRW, that is the BMO MRW, or in the RNFL, and it was better with BMO MRW. And the normal was compared with the suspect, and the normal was compared with POAG and PSEG. Suspects was also compared with POAG and PSEG, and ROC analysis was arrived. So the diagnostic power was highest for the BMO MRW, especially for differentiating normal from suspects. But the result doesn't end there. Even the optic nerve size variable, that is the disc size, is actually variable because everyone has a different disc size. So how about the influence of the disc size on the BMO MRW and RNFL? So that changed the equation totally. The BMO area actually related to MRW, whereas the BMO area did not relate with RNFL. So that changed the equation, and we had to divide the data into two, and we had to go a small BMO area group, again age matched, and they were defined as less than or equal to 1.8 millimeter square area. Large BMO area group, again age matched, and they were defined as greater than 1.8 millimeter square area. And the results were again divided and tabulated as follows. So the normal you see, in the smaller group it was 294 and it was 235 in the larger group. Smaller group, the BMO MRW is slightly higher. In the glaucoma suspect 256, 233 is slightly higher in the smaller group, and followed by POAG and PSEG. But important point here is the RNFL value. You can see that in the normals, 93, 95, it is more or less the same. And in the suspect group, 99, 98, more or less the same. POAG 87, 84, more or less the same. So the RNFL was kind of similar in the small and the large BMO area group. So the discussion, imagine a large disc and a small disc having the same RNFL thickness. So this is how the large disc and a small disc, but these are the same RNFL thickness or the neuroretinal rim area. What happens to the BMO MRW is a large disc will have a small BMO MRW, whereas a small disc will have a large BMO MRW. So the conclusion after running the ROC analysis for this separate groups for finding whether BMO or the RNFL is good revealed that small discs had better diagnostic precision with BMO MRW than RNFL, whereas large discs had better diagnostic precision with RNFL. So this was an important finding of our study. And why this tool BMO MRW or the anatomical positioning system in spectralis is a game changer is it marks the foveal center, it marks the BMO center, it plots the BMO, fovea BMO axis. So despite a head tilt or a cyclotorsion, the same piece of tissue is examined at every visit. So that's the beauty about this technology. So even for a patient who is under control from 2019, 2020 and 2021, IOP under control is on maximum tolerable medical therapy. As you can see in the red arrow, even a small amount of progression can be picked up easily and it helps a lot. And also it's an impact in pre-perimetric glaucomatous damage too. A normal fundus, non-specific visual field defect, ganglion cell layer normal, RNFL thickness normal, but you can see the BMO MRW is constricted and it gives a pre-perimetric glaucomatous damage picking up. Summary. So the BMO area influences the diagnostic precision of BMO MRW, but it does not affect the RNFL at all. And also the area increases, then it causes a decrease in the diagnostic precision of BMO MRW. So choose wisely according to the disc size is a take-home message, where if RNFL or BMO MRW, if the disc size is higher, as you can see, 2.82 millimeters or above 1.8 or 2 millimeter square disc area or the BMO area, as it would say, then choose RNFL. If the disc size, as you can see on my right-hand side, if it is 1.75 millimeter square, then go for the new novel technology BMO MRW. Thank you.
Okay. So, Dr. Prasanna,
Yes, sir.
I have a question. So,
Yes,
two things. One, you didn't, when you know, the nice presentation, you classified it, small and large area, and you said that what we should use, but your data doesn't support that. In a sense that, when you say that small and large and, it changes, then you should show the data, which you didn't. What was the AUROC for the small less than 1.8 for the small disc?
the graph, sir.
So see the small overall AUROC was 0.56, which is very mediocre to start with. So anything which is sensitive specificity 82, then we are in trouble using that any parameter. So first of all, the AUROC should be good enough. Around at least 0.8 or more. So we start talking about the use of the technology or the parameters. So that you keep in mind.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question, Dr. Prasanna. Well
Yes.
presented.
Yes.
Did you exclude myopic eyes from this cohort? Because they are known to have different BMROs.
Ma'am, myopics, we didn't actually exclude. Consenting consecutive patients, despite them being myopic or not, if they had a glaucoma, if the myopic patient had glaucoma, then they were actually included in the study. We didn't have a special exclusion criteria for myopics as such.
Myopics, not tilted discs.
Pardon me, ma'am?
Myopia or tilted disc, none of them were excluded.
If the myopia or tilted disc were non-glaucomatous, then they were excluded.
Oh, that's
If they
okay.
were- yeah.
So, what Dr. Kirti Singh, makes sense because it, they're using lots of confounding factor.
Yes,
You
sir.
should have removed all the confounders, before the analysis, before you start the study. So when you do, and anyway, the sample is too small. So if you are including
Yes,
the
sir.
more patients, then what Dr. Kirti Singh said, that you remove the confounders and you get a, more clear picture.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can we have the next speaker now?
Dr. Nilesh Kumar.
Yes, sir. So shall I start sharing the screen, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to all the judges and everyone in the audience. I would like to thank AIO Scientific Committee for providing me this opportunity. I am Dr. Nilesh Kumar, and I am here to present my work on validation of smartphone-based gonio imaging technique, direct imaging of gonio mirror by smartphone. This is free paper 210. These are my financial disclosures. I hold the patent and commercial right of the device used in this study, and we have taken utmost precaution that my bias doesn't affect the outcome. Glaucoma, as we all know, is the leading cause of irreversible blindness worldwide, and India has much more higher incidence of angle closure glaucoma compared to the world. The only way to differentiate the open and closed angle is by gonioscopy, but it is not performed in all the patients. In fact, only half of the patients visiting a glaucoma clinic in US get a gonioscopy done at baseline. 80% of the junior residents are not at all confident doing it, while 25% of the practicing ophthalmologists are not satisfied with the skill they have. The major roadblocks include the enigma of the skill itself, the dependency on slit lamp, the lack of quality trainers, and the time it involves in a busy OPD. And we don't have feasible options that can reliably replace the gonioscopy. So our research question was, can we find a reliable, rapid, and frugal method to classify open and closed angles? So we devised a smartphone-based gonio imaging technique based on the principle of indirect gonioscopy. The published article is a pilot study to validate the underlying principle, which formed the basis of this present study being presented here. The technique was refined to innovate a smartphone-based gonio imaging device, which we called Direct Imaging of Gonio Mirror by Smartphone Pro, or DIGS Pro. The aim of the current study is to validate the images obtained using DIGS Pro by correlating them with the gold standard slit lamp gonioscopy. It was a prospective single-center, single-masked validation study conducted from April 2019 to March 2020 at a glaucoma clinic in a tertiary care hospital in South India. Sample size was calculated to be 220 images at 90% power and alpha of 0.05 for Cohen's-Kappa agreement. With gradable image quality acquisition rate of 80% with the pilot study, 278 images were required to meet the minimum sample size. A single physician did the slit lamp gonioscopy to grade the angles. Another masked physician performed the gonio imaging using DIGS Pro. 4-mirror gonio lens, same, was used for both the procedure, and 1+6 smartphone was used for DIGS Pro to obtain the images. This is how the device is being set up for use. We place the gonio lens in the adapter, which by design itself aligns centrally with the optics of the smartphone holding segment, where the smartphone is snapped fit. As we can see, the smartphone is being snapped fit. The normal camera app is to be used for clicking the images. The lens with the holder is applied in normal fashion under topical anesthesia, and the patient is asked to look straight. The smartphone segment aligns with the lens adapter, and we have to click using camera flash and normal camera app. The quality of images were classified into gradable and non-gradable, being adapted from a study done by Azad et al. Using RedCam. Grade 1, where all angle landmarks were clearly seen. Grade 2, where some structures were clear, others were blurred. And Grade 3, where angle landmarks could not be ascertained due to blurring or reflections. We used Grade 1 and Grade 2 images. Saffir's classification was used to classify open and closed angle, with Grade 3 or above being considered open angle, and Grade 2 or below being considered closed angle. Physician performing gonioscopy graded gonio images on a later date, and the images were masked to remove any personal identification, while another grader also graded the images independently in masked fashion. Both the grader hold no financial interest in the device used. All the data was used in MS Excel and was expressed in percentages, and IBM SPSS for version 23 was used to calculate the Cohen's-Kappa coefficient. Sequential images were obtained using a sample size of 220. Out of 280, 250 images were of gradable quality, and 55% were having open angle and 44% were having closed angle on slit lamp gonioscopy. The kappa coefficient between gold standard slit lamp gonioscopy and device was 0.65, while between two masked reader was 0.82, both implying substantial agreement to classify open and closed angle. 91.6% agreement was found in the level of pigmentation based on slit lamp and DixPro. These are some images obtained from DixPro during our study. Angle recession with hyphema, iridodialysis cleft, a glimpse of disc, some peripheral anterior synechia, Sam Palsy line was seen, plateau iris configuration we could image, an inverse hypopyon, a silicon bubble in the anterior chamber, and some more synechia we could image. Gonioscopy is an essential component of glaucoma diagnosis and determines the line of management. The current study provides for a cost-effective, frugal, innovative technique to screen for open and closed angle of anterior chamber, and it provides 80% clear gradable image. Our study also reveals the prevalence rate of open angle at 55.7% and rest having some form of angle closure, which is similar to the Indian population, which was at study. The limitation of the study is it being flash-based diffuse illumination that may induce pupil reconstruction. To conclude, DixPro is a new frugal innovation that can help in screening the patient for open and closed angle. Good quality images can be obtained, and these patients can be further counseled and treated, thus lowering the disease burden. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for such an insightful session and for finishing it on time. We can have any questions. If
Question from the judges.
Yes, sir.
Was it difficult to insert the gonio lens?
Ma'am?
It was
sorry.
the adapter, no?
Yes, ma'am. It was an adapter, ma'am. But we have taken. Yes, ma'am. We have taken up the length of the adapter, the distance between the patient cornea and the adapter. It has been taken. It has been taken with such a distance that it doesn't affect on the brow. It is not touching on the brow, ma'am. So we have validated and designed it like that.
One question from you, Dr. Nilesh.
Yes.
Once you just attach the smartphone with the adapter, doesn't it move doesn't move the gonio lens so much that it affects the? I mean, it can hurt the cornea or something, because you are attaching the phone after you have attached the gonio lens.
Yes, but I have the devices. So what we do is, sorry, I it's not. So the entire weight is on our hand, sir. The entire weight of the device is on our hand, and we are just touching it. So it is not like we are leaving it and giving the weight on the patient cornea. So we are just holding the lens on the patients as we do in our slit lamp, and this we just put it over it, sir. So entire weight is on our hands.
Okay. Is it in the market right now?
It itself is a difficult thing.
Yes, sir.
You are proposing this for the general ophthalmologist. So holding it in one hand, because patient is not going to keep the thing steady.
Yes, ma'am. So that's what, ma'am. What we do is we propose to use the gonio lens, which comes with a flank. The 4-mirror gonio lens comes with a flank, so it is very easy to use with that. So if we get some amount of patient control over the patient eye also. And sir, it is available in the market, sir, but we are not promoting.
What's the cost of this?
Ma'am, it is 25,000, ma'am, to be.
And how is it more frugal than the 2,500, 25,000?
25,000, yes, ma'am. 2,500.
How is it more frugal?
Ma'am, anything else, ma'am? If we are going to buy a Nidec gonio imaging device, that is costing 18 lakh, ma'am. So that is the only thing that, and gonio pen is around 8 lakhs. So these two are the only gonio imaging devices we have. Otherwise, we can add an adapter in the imaging device in the slit lamp that also costs around 4 to 5 lakhs. So this is, we are not proposing it to replace the gonioscopy that costs around 40,000. But to image the gonio and to keep a record, it is cheaper.
In 30 patients that you did not get gradable images, what was the cause?
Ma'am, it was due to reflections, ma'am. High amount of reflections were there. Mostly they were having some amount of high pressure, so corneal edema, some amount of corneal edema was there. So we
are
got a lot of
overshooting the
reflections.
time. Now we have to stop. Huh?
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this
very much. Thank you very much, judges. Dr. Partha here. Dr. Kirti is also one of the judges in the session. Dr. Kirti, I hope you have got your mark sheet and your marking as well.
Just in the morning, actually, just today morning, I received the link.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Please carry on. And let us stick to time. We are a little tight on the time. Thank you very much. Please carry on.
We can have the next speaker, Dr. Sujata. Dr. Sujata is here.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Can I start my?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure.
Very good morning. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Sujata Laktakia from SS Medical College, Rewa in MP. And the topic of my presentation today is validation of ISNT route by optical coherence tomography. The study was approved by the Institutional Ethical Committee, and there was no financial assistance of any sort taken for the study. Glaucoma, as we all know, is a disease characterized by the loss of retinal ganglion cells. The axons of the retinal ganglion cells form the retinal nerve fiber layer, and it is the retinal nerve fiber layer which forms the neuroretinal rim as it exits the optic nerve. Thus, retinal ganglion cell loss is reflected in all these structures. In 1988, Jonas et al. Showed that the neuroretinal rim in normal individuals followed a typical configuration in terms of the thickness being broadest in the inferior quadrant and successively decreasing in the superior and nasal quadrants to be the thinnest in the temporal quadrant. This characteristic configuration was termed as the ISNT rule. Later on, a study showed that the RNFL thickness at the peripapillary border also followed the ISNT rule. So if we measure the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness accurately by OCT, it would tell us if the number of nerve fibers in each quadrant affects the respective rim area. Hence, we undertook the present study with an aim to determine whether the retinal nerve fiber layer thickness in normal eyes follows the ISNT rule, and also to assess if variants of the ISNT rule could be applied to the same. Sorry. This was a cross-sectional observational study carried out at the glaucoma clinic of a tertiary healthcare center. The study included 62 healthy individuals who were 18 years or more of age with the best corrected visual acuity of 20 by 40 or better and a refractive correction not exceeding ±3 diopters. Subjects having any ocular or systemic condition that could affect RNFL thickness were excluded from the study, as also were those who had an OCT scan signal strength of less than 6. After enrollment, all subjects underwent a comprehensive ophthalmic examination, and quadrant-wise RNFL thickness was measured using SD-OCT. The age of the study subjects varied from 31 to 76 years with a mean age of 45 ±14 years. No gender predilection was observed in our study, with the male is to female ratio being 0.9:1. This table shows the mean values of the various study parameters. The mean RNFL thickness for the entire study cohort showed that the inferior quadrant was the thickest, measured at 131 microns, and the temporal quadrant was the least, being measured at 69.5 microns. Analyzing the validity of the ISNT rule and its variants, we found that only 58.06% of patients followed the ISNT rule. However, the percentage of subjects following the IST and the IS rules was more at 85% and 88% respectively. These are the OCT images of the retinal nerve fiber layer thickness. The image on the left-hand side, although not very good quality, but the image on the left-hand side shows the validation of the ISNT rule, whereas the image on the right-hand side shows violation of the ISNT rule. Now, in the present study, we observed that the ISNT rule for RNFL thickness was applicable in only 58% subjects. This was attributed to the fact that the temporal RNFL was thicker than the nasal in 27% of the subjects, and the superior RNFL was thicker than the inferior one in 14% individuals. Our observations are corroborated by various other studies which documented that the percentage of individuals following the ISNT rule varied between 45 to 58%. Since the ISNT rule was mainly violated because of thinner nasal RNFL, it would mean that exclusion of the nasal quadrant from this rule would increase its applicability. Applying this to our study subjects, we observed a significant increase in the validation of the IST and IS rules, with the percentage of individuals conforming to these rules increasing to 85.4% and 88.8% respectively. Sorry. Various other studies various other studies have also reported better validation of the IST and IS rules as compared to the ISNT rules in their studies. However, the percentage of individuals following these rules is variable. So to conclude, the ISNT rule validation for RNFL thickness in normal subjects is lesser as compared to validation for IST and the IS rules in normal subjects. The carry home message from this study would be that a rule applicable to a gross population may not be valid for every person because of individual variations. So like any other method of examination or investigation, the ISNT rule has also shown to have some fallacies. As such, the IST and IS rules must be used for evaluation of the optic nerve head. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Very nice presentation, and I can ask the judges for any queries from the speaker.
What have you done to take care of the tilt of the disc? Any quantifiable measurement or just the plain structure?
The tilted can affect the RNFL thickness measurements. So we've had excluded all cases of tilted disc and other disc anomalies which could affect the RNFL measurements.
Dr. Suchata, well presented. Did you categorize the discs into large size, medium size, and small size while validating ISNT rule?
Ma'am, it should have been done, but in my study, I didn't do that, and I think that could be a confounding factor because the size of the disc ultimately will affect the thickness of the retinal nerve fiber layer.
Yes, correct. Okay, so maybe the next follow-up study you could do that.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Sujata, for such an insightful session.
Thank you so much.
And do we have any more further questions? Okay.
I think we can move on to.
We can move to our next speaker.
You are not audible. The person who is on the comment in the hall is not audible to me.
Ma'am, थोड़ा सा loudly बोलिए, ma'am.
Yeah, am I audible to you?
Yes, now it's better. Now it's better.
Yeah, sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah. Can we please move to our next speaker? And I would request our next speaker to please switch on the camera, unmute the mic, and start screen sharing.
Dr. Meena, please. Dr. Meena is here?
I'm here, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sharing the screen now, sir.
Dr. Neera or Dr. Meera? I'm not.
Meena. It is Meena.
Dr. Meena.
Yeah.
Yes. Just, sorry, just give me 2 minutes. Please. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My paper is Peel It to Heal It, AGV Decapsulation for Managing Late Failures. I have no financial disclosures. Ahmed glaucoma valve implantation is often the last resort in the management of glaucomas. Especially, it is used in the treatment of refractory glaucomas in cases of multiple failed glaucoma surgeries. In view of its good safety profile, it is now being considered as the first line of management in many primary glaucomas. One of the complications of AGV implantation is late failure. This occurs due to the formation of a fibrous capsule around the foot plate. This does not allow the aqueous to move out, causes a rise in intraocular pressure. This is the fibrosed capsule that we can see around the AGV foot plate. The management options for this complication include the addition of anti-glaucoma medications. A few studies have reported needling of the bleb with injection of fluorouracil and mitomycin C, surgical removal of the cyst wall or decapsulation are recorded in few papers. Ultimately, if all fails, second implant or additional filtration surgery requires to be done. In this paper, we have studied decapsulation or surgical removal of the cyst wall. The aim of the study is to evaluate the outcomes of AGV decapsulation in patients with late surgical failure following AGV implantation. Patients with intraocular pressure of more than 21 millimeters of mercury on maximal medical therapy, that is 4 anti-glaucoma medications, with more than 6 months following implantation surgery were included in the study. Patients with no light perception and patients with other causes of failure like tube blockage with iris or vitreous were excluded from the study. Preoperatively, best corrected visual acuity, slit lamp examination, intraocular pressure measurement with Goldmann applanation tonometry were done. Detailed history, including the number of anti-glaucoma medications being used, preoperative diagnosis, and detailed surgical history were also taken. This is the operative procedure. We can see a thick dome-shaped swelling over the foot plate suggestive of an encapsulated bleb. The conjunctiva is being raised by injection of local anesthetic. The conjunctiva is then dissected to expose the cyst wall. An incision is made over the cyst wall till a gush of aqueous is seen. Following confirmation of aqueous, we excise the cyst wall. The cyst wall was excised to the extent possible, but many studies have suggested that a minimum of 3 into 3 millimeters of wall be excised for this procedure. The conjunctiva is then sutured with interrupted H0 vicryl sutures. Post-operatively, the patients were called for follow-up at 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. At each visit, the best corrected visual acuity, slit lamp examination, intraocular pressure measurement, and surgical complications were recorded. If the IOP recorded was found to be high, anti-glaucoma medications were added as per requirement. It was defined as total success when the intraocular pressure was less than 21 without any AGM, and if AGMs were being used and the intraocular pressure was less than 21, it was defined as qualified success, and it was failure when the pressure was more than 21 millimeters of mercury on 4 anti-glaucoma medications. Coming to the results, we found 5 cases fitting into our inclusion criteria and included them in the study. The average preoperative IOP in these patients was 29.6 millimeters of mercury. All of them were on 4 anti-glaucoma medications. Immediately following decapsulation at 2 weeks, the intraocular pressure dropped to 15.2 millimeters of mercury at an average without any anti-glaucoma medications. At 6 months, 4 patients required anti-glaucoma medications. 1 patient achieved full success without any anti-glaucoma medications, and 1 patient required additional glaucoma filtration surgery. There were no surgical complications recorded, and there was no loss of visual acuity in all 5 patients. Encapsulation incidence is recorded in various studies at an incidence of 20 to 25% in multiple studies in Ahmed glaucoma valve. It is more commonly seen in Ahmed valves than the other non-valve devices. It is a simple, cost-effective, and repeatable option which can be performed in these cases. Coming to my take clinic messages, it is a successful treatment option for late failure of Ahmed glaucoma valves. It is relatively easier to perform. It delays or eliminates the need for additional filtration surgery. And if future glaucoma surgeries are required, the conjunctiva is preserved for future surgeries. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Cases had exposure of the plate.
None of the 5 cases had exposure, ma'am.
Because the suture line is exactly lying on the edge of the plate.
We didn't have any because we found that the capsule again reforms over the foot plate. So we didn't have any cases of exposure.
Meena, you have termed this as a repeatable procedure.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you exactly mean by repeatable? How many times do you think you can go ahead and do this?
I have not included in the study, but in one patient, we had repeated the procedure with success, but there are no reports suggesting of more than 2 procedures. There is one report which says they have repeated it twice with success.
And you did not think of augmenting this with any antifibrotic agent?
We did not do it in this study, ma'am, but MMC 0.04% has been found to show some increase in success along with the decapsulation technique. We did not augment this study.
Do you undermine the conjunctiva more posteriorly also after you have taken out the
No, sir. We cover it. We just make sure that it is totally covering and attain a watertight closure, sir.
No, covering is okay. I'm just asking after you delaminate or you just remove the cyst, do you go slightly posteriorly to undermine the conjunctiva so that the ring doesn't form again?
No, sir. We did not remove the total capsule. Only the anterior portion we had removed in this study. Most studies show that a 3 into 3 millimeters is the minimum basic that should be done. But one study had done the total decapsulation also with similar results.
Did you attempt needling prior to peeling the capsule?
No, ma'am, we did not needle because one study had done the needling on slit lamp itself, but it was not shown to have much success. We did not attempt needling before decapsulation.
So can we go on to the next speaker? Thank you, Dr. Meena.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Meena. Here I invite our next speaker for the day, Dr. Nikhil Balakrishnan. And I request Dr. Nikhil to please switch on the camera and unmute the mic and share the screen. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Should I share my screen, sir? Good morning. My topic for the day is deciphering the conundrum of aerosolization during non-contact tonometry. So we all know that there are rising number of cases of COVID-19 worldwide, and this pandemic has set us aback over the past 2 years. It is also well documented that COVID is usually spread through aerosols. The aerosols which are spread could be in the form of either droplets or micro droplets and spread freely to the population. It has been documented and the papers have been published regarding the same. We also know that non-contact tonometry is a daily OPD procedure, which is used worldwide for IOP screening in all cases coming to our OPD. In a paper published in 1981, it was by the group called BRIT. It was shown that microaerosol formation is produced when a non-contact air puff tonometry is performed. And based on this, the guidelines of many different bodies, including the AIOS, had suggested early last year when the country went into lockdown that NCT should be avoided in patients. So our research question was, are aerosols produced during non-contact tonometry? We collaborated with the fluid velocimetry team for the IISc Bangalore, which has recently been rated as the #1 research institute in the world. So what we did is a procedure known as frontal lighting or a shadowgraphy. We used an ultra high resolution camera, which captured to 20,000 frames per second, a high intensity strobe light. We used the Shin Nippon NCT, and this is a image of the exact setup what we used. We used a technique which is known as shadowgraphy, in which with a combination of a high resolution camera, we can image particles of size between even 10 to 30 microns. We also, in our second arm of the study, used a fluorescein setup in which we used a Nikon DSLR camera, a blue LED light with a light source of 450 nanometers. And this is the photo of the fluorescein stained eye. And also a night mode in a Realme camera with a 4K resolution was also used. Now, NCT was performed in normal eye conditions after installation of 1 drop of a lubricant and after installation of 2 drops of a lubricant. Now, what were the results of our study? In normal eye conditions, if you see here, this is a shadowgraphy view. There is absolutely no aerosol generation. This experiment was repeated in 10 different subjects. The same has also been captured, if you see here, on a smartphone in the nightscape mode, in the DSLR, and in a high-speed imaging. After that, we instilled a drop of lubricant in all the 10 patients, and we reconducted the same experiment. Here we see that there is a single droplet, a single amount or minimal amount of aerosolization is seen following a drop of lubricant before the NCT being performed. And the same was also captured on fluorescein in the nightscape mode. We went on and performed the same experiment after installation of 2 drops of the lubricant. Here we could see copious amount of aerosol production, which also traversed back to the NCT port. The same experiment again was performed after installation of 2 drops of the lubricant in a nightscape mode 2. And these were our findings again. You could see how profuse amount of aerosolization is being, and which can see that the droplets have reached back to the NCT port 2. We also used mathematical modeling, and we've tried to find out the distance which these droplets could traverse if we were in a room with an AC on or in a low airflow room. So what was the conclusion of our study? We concluded that no aerosols are produced in normal eye conditions, so NCT can safely be performed in the OPD. There is a mild splatter of aerosol observed on 1 drop of installation, and hence NCT should be avoided in watery conditions immediately post-op. Profuse splatter of aerosols is noted on 2 drops, installation of 2 drops of a lubricant, and NCT should not be performed post-drop installation. And finally, there is contamination of the NCT may occur in cases of profuse aerosolization, and hence regular disinfection should be performed between 2 patients. So what new does our study add? Our study was one of the first to use shadowgraphy and high-speed photography to demonstrate aerosol generation. It was the first study to demonstrate that no visible or invisible aerosols are generated during NCT in normal eye conditions. And it affirms that NCT should only be avoided in conditions with watery eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil, for a wonderful presentation. It's really innovative. I have just one question: that which lubricant was used, and what was the time difference between using the lubricant and taking the reading?
So we used a normal teardrops in all the patients.
No, it is 0.5%, 1%, or polyethylene glycol. So many lubricants are there with different viscosity, and they travel a different distance.
Yes, sir. So what we did was we used a 1% CMC in all the patients, and yes, sir. And it was used and after 10 seconds of installation of the drop in the eye, then the procedure was performed. And even in the paper, if we see, which was published by Britt in 1981, which on basis of which the guidelines were formed, they only captured everything using fluorescein staining. So during fluorescein staining, we have to instill a drop of paraffin, and due to which there was a profuse amount of aerosolization. But as was the first study in which when we put no drops in the eye whatsoever, we found there was no amount of aerosolization being found post the NCT procedure.
Okay. Questions from the judges, please.
Please proceed with the second presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Balakrishnan, for finishing it on time and for such an insightful session. Next, we have our next speaker, Dr. Rasika Khedkar. Is she here? Okay, can we have our next speaker, Dr. Padma Priya?
Please confirm Rasika is absent. Please confirm.
Good morning, dignitaries. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Someone else has started screen sharing, so I'm not able to.
Yeah, that's what we don't have the person. Dr. Padma Priya is presenting.
Yes, sir.
Don't we have two others before that? Dr. Abhipasha and Dr. Priyanka, are they here?
Yes, sir, I'm here. I'm Dr. Priyanka.
So I think
Dr.
Dr.
Priyanka Ramesh is the next.
Yeah, Dr. Priyanka should be the next, and then Dr. Padma Priya.
Sorry, sir, but I didn't have the order, so I'm sorry
Yeah.
for that.
Just stop sharing your slide.
Yeah, please, we can have Dr. Priyanka first, and then we can have Dr. Padma.
Sir, I am reconfirming that Rasika is absent
Yes, yes, ma'am.
because we have to mark that.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Priyanka, you can start sharing your screen, please. Dr. Priyanka, are you there? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
You're audible, definitely, doctor.
So, I thought that I'm not audible and Dr. Priyanka is not starting. So, Dr. Priyanka, if you are ready, we can start with your presentation. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next speaker. Is the next speaker ready?
I think her name is, maybe she is not logged in yet.
She was here just now.
No, she is here. She is here. Dr. Priyanka, you please share screen.
Sir, if she has an internet problem, we can go to the
Okay,
next speaker.
we
and
can
then-
go to the next speaker in that meantime. Yeah, so.
Dr. Sahu.
Dr. Sahu, Dr. Abhipasha Sahu.
Sir, am I audible?
Dr. Priyanka, are you?
Dr. Priyanka is muted.
Dr. Priyanka is muted.
Probably
Please
we
kindly
can go
unmute
to
her.
Dr. Sahu, and after that, if Priyanka is ready, we can come back.
Yeah.
Dr. Sahu?
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah. Yes. You can share screen and start.
Okay, sir. Are my slides visible, sir?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting a pilot study on ocular biometry changes after mannitol in vitrectomized eyes versus non-vitrectomized eyes. I have no financial disclosures. As is a common practice of using hyperosmotic agents to relieve acute pain and for preventing vascular occlusion from high IOP in non-vitrectomized eyes. However, previous studies have shown comparable IOP reduction between vitrectomized as well as non-vitrectomized eyes with mannitol. To best of our knowledge, there is no study in the literature which evaluates changes in the ocular biometry associated with mannitol in vitrectomized eyes and the mechanism behind it. So this study was designed to report the changes in ocular biometry after mannitol administration in vitrectomized eyes and compare it to the non-vitrectomized eyes. So this was a case control pilot study undertaken at a tertiary care center between July 2019 to April 2020 with 10 consecutive eyes in each arm. So group 1 included vitrectomized eyes with silicone oil injection with IOP more than 40 mm of Hg. And group 2 included newly diagnosed cases of open angle glaucoma with IOP more than 40 mm of Hg. Previous history of glaucoma surgery or with angle closure disease or inflammatory glaucoma were excluded from the study, as were the overfilled silicone oil filled eyes, and any contraindication for of mannitol were also excluded. So pre and post mannitol ocular biometry was done, which included the axial length, anterior chamber depth, lens thickness, and central corneal thickness was noted. And the vitreous cavity depth was calculated using this formula. The baseline characteristics were comparable in both groups, and the IOP reduction noted in both groups were statistically significant and comparable. The anterior chamber depth remained unchanged in the vitrectomized eyes, but showed a significant increase in the non-vitrectomized eyes. The CCT showed considerable decrease in both groups, and which was statistically significant. Now coming to the axial length, which also showed a statistically significant decrease in both groups. Hence, the vitreous cavity depth, which was calculated, showed a decrease in both groups, but it was statistically significant only in the non-vitrectomized eyes. So this study showed that a significant reduction in IOP was noted in both groups, and the group 2, which was the non-vitrectomized eyes, showed an increase in the anterior chamber depth and a decrease in the vitreous cavity depth, pointing more at vitreous dehydration as the main mechanism for decrease in IOP. However, group 1, which was vitrectomized eyes, showed a decrease in axial length and unchanged anterior chamber depth with a non-significant decrease in the vitreous cavity depth. So the mechanism behind the IOP reduction, which was significant, could be due to the centrally mediated mechanism via osmoreceptors, resulting in a decrease in the aqueous production itself. A similar study done by a group called Magor et al. Identified the change in the ocular biometry changes by instilling a low dose mannitol, and concluded that apart from vitreous dehydration, mannitol also acts on the central osmoreceptors and thus decreases the IOP centrally. Hence, mannitol acts by a direct osmotic dehydration mechanism and also by a central mechanism via osmoreceptors. However, we did have some limitation. This being a pilot study had a very small sample size, and the degree of zonular weakness was not taken into consideration, which may have contributed to a greater change in the anterior chamber depth in either of the groups. And the choroidal thickness, which should have been studied along with the biometry data, was not taken into consideration. So to conclude, a significant increase in the anterior chamber depth and a decrease in vitreous cavity depth was noted in non-vitrectomized eyes, which signifies the dehydration of vitreous body post-mannitol as a main mechanism of reduction in IOP. However, the anterior chamber depth remained unchanged, and a non-significant decrease in the vitreous cavity depth was noted in the vitrectomized eyes. Thus, the mechanism of IOP reduction in vitrectomized eyes may be attributed to a centrally mediated mechanism, in contrast to non-vitrectomized eyes, which may be due to vitreous dehydration primarily. These are my references.
Thank you, Dr. Sahu, for the session. Can we have the questions now, please?
It's a very innovative study and a very different take on the vitrectomized vis-a-vis non-vitrectomized. Just a small suggestion, make the font on your slides larger and make it less noisy. Then it becomes more visible what you want to speak.
I'll take you, ma'am.
Any changes in relation to myopic eyes or the pseudophakic and non-pseudophakic?
Ma'am, we had taken only phakic patients into consideration,
But
we had not included any pseudophakic eyes. However, the group with vitrectomized eyes did have more myopes compared to the control group.
There, the scleral rigidity may be of a different type, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I would like to know, what do you mean by overfilled silicon? All are silicon filled eyes, no?
Ma'am, overfilled silicon oil is a condition where wherein we'll not be able to see the meniscus of the silicon oil on inferior gaze using a indirect ophthalmoscope.
Thank you. No more question. Go to the second.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sahu. And we can move on to the next speaker. If Dr. Priyanka is ready, she can share her slides. Dr. Priyanka, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Am I audible? And
Yes.
Are my slides visible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning to all the panelists and the judges. AIOC for giving me this opportunity. I'm here to present my paper titled Incisional Goniotomy, a Savior in Cases of Failed Trabeculectomy in Adult Glaucomas. I have no financial disclosures. Trabeculectomy continues to be the most preferred surgical modality for controlling intraocular pressure, but the success reduces with time. Management of failed trabeculectomy includes needling, revision trabeculectomy, re-trabeculectomy, or performing glaucoma drainage device surgeries. With the advent of MIGS, many of these implants have also been used, but they come at a significant cost. Incisional goniotomy with a disposable MVR blade is a low-cost alternative to Cahoog dual blade or the trabectome and can be used in patients with failed trabeculectomy. The aim of this study was to evaluate the safety and IOP-lowering efficacy of incisional goniotomy with or without phacoemulsification in patients with previous failed trabeculectomies. It was a prospective interventional study done after ethical clearance from the IEC. We included patients more than 18 years with intraocular pressure above the target on maximal medical therapy and those who had failed trabeculectomies. We excluded patients with hazy cornea or corneal opacity, which prevented us from performing the goniotomy, or those with significant PAS where goniosynechiolysis was not possible. After a routine preoperative evaluation, including gonioscopy to look at the angles, we also performed ASOCT to look at the ITC index and also the Humphrey visual field analysis. We classified the patients based on the severity of glaucoma using the Hodapp-Parrish-Anderson criteria. After the procedure, the postoperative workup was done on day 1, 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. The routine evaluation was done. Along with this, the intraocular pressure was noted, especially on postoperative day 1 for the presence of any IOP spike. IOP spike was defined as IOP of more than 10 mmHg from the baseline or an absolute value of more than 30 mmHg on medications. ASOCT was also performed on 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. So after a routine phacoemulsification and intraocular lens implantation, the anterior chamber was filled with a viscoelastic device, and with the help of a Swan-Jacob gonio lens, a MVR blade was used to perform the goniotomy. If they were goniosynechate, then goniosynechiolysis was performed with the help of a 27-gauge cannula. Success was defined as intraocular pressure less than or equal to 18 mmHg without any medications. And failure was defined as an IOP of more than 18 mmHg or those requiring de novo surgeries for IOP reduction. We also studied the reduction in the number of glaucoma medication and the presence of any intraoperative or postoperative complications. So we included 16 eyes in this study, out of which 2 had mild to moderate glaucoma and the rest had severe glaucoma. The mean baseline intraocular pressure was 30.93 mmHg, and on an average of 2.8 medications, preoperatively the IOP was 24.37. 14 eyes required phacoemulsification along with goniotomy, and in 4 eyes, goniosynechiolysis was done. So there was a significant reduction in the intraocular pressure from 24.37 preoperatively to 14.93 at the final follow-up, which was a 37% reduction, which was statistically significant. There was also a 36% reduction in the glaucoma medications from 2.81 to 1.8, which was again statistically significant. 87% of the eyes had success, out of which 86% had absolute success and 14%, 86% had qualified success and 14% had absolute success. The ITC index also reduced post-operatively. At 3 months, it reduced from 89.82 to 68.76, which was maintained at a 6-month interval. And there was no difference in the ITC index between the 3 months and the 6-month follow-up. We had 4 patients who had hyphema in the postoperative period and 2 patients who had an IOP spike. The cumulative probability of success at 6 months for IOP of less than equal to 18 mmHg was 87.5%, and for IOP of less than equal to 15 mmHg, it was 68%. So there was a 37% reduction in the intraocular pressure and 36% reduction in the number of medications and no sight-threatening complications. So disposable MVR is a cheaper alternative than the other MIGS. It has no bleb-related complications, no conjunctival manipulation, shorter surgical time, and with the help of 2 ports, we can do up to 270 degrees of goniotomy. So these are the different surgical modalities that have been tried for failed trabeculectomies, including posterior surgical revision, same-site revision, needling, and glaucoma drainage devices. With the MIGS, the iStent, the Zen implant, canaloplasty, GAT, as well as ab internal trabeculectomy. The limitation of this study is that it was a small size and a very short follow-up period for a glaucoma surgery. And we did not do any separate statistical comparison for eyes with phaco plus goniotomy versus those undergoing goniotomy alone, because phaco itself is known to cause some amount of reduction in the intraocular pressure. The single-use blade-assisted incisional goniotomy combined with or without phacoemulsification resulted in significant sustained reduction in intraocular pressure in eyes with failed trabeculectomies, along with a decrease in the number of glaucoma medications at 6 months, being less and having a reasonable safety alternative, and it is worth pursuing further. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka Ramesh. Do we have any questions?
So, a nice presentation. But as you mentioned, the limitation, when you combine with the cataract, the results,
yes, sir.
So you cannot compare basically, and your follow-up is short.
Yes,
so
sir.
the cataract phaco would have significant impact even in open angle glaucoma.
Yes, sir.
So if you want really to pursue this, you have to have either 2 groups with adequate number or present only goniotopy results, because these results cannot be used in clinical practice.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any more questions from the judges, please? Or the chairperson?
No, sir.
Okay.
So before we conclude, I think we have to give a final call to Dr. Priyanka.
Dr. Priyanka is here. Dr. Padma Priya's presentation is still.
Dr. Priyanka Ramesh is here.
So I just presented now.
Dr. Padma Priya. Dr. Padma Priya.
Padma Priya.
Yeah, Dr. Padma Priya has to present. If she is here.
No, calling for Dr. Padma Priya presented just now.
No.
No, Dr. Priyanka.
Dr. Priyanka presented. Dr. Padma Priya has to present.
Okay.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, all. My presentation is on role of anterior segment OCT in evaluating function of trabeculectomy bleb. Glaucoma is the leading cause of irreversible blindness worldwide, for which trabeculectomy still remains the most commonly performed incisional surgery. Bleb morphology is an important clinical parameter for bleb function. The study focuses on early bleb features in ASOCT and their correlation with surgical outcome, and it also compares the clinical bleb grading to ASOCT imaging. 34 eyes with primary glaucoma which underwent trabeculectomy with MMC were taken, of which 23 were male and 11 were female of age 48 to 84 years. Detailed pre-op evaluation was done, and trabeculectomy with MMC was done in all the cases. Postoperatively, the patients were examined and intraocular pressure was maintained on day 1 and weekly up to 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. The outcome of the surgery were grouped as success and failure. Success defined as IOP less than 18 millimeters of mercury at 6 months postoperatively, and failure IOP more than 18 millimeters of mercury and a decrease in visual acuity by 2 Snellen lines at 6 months follow-up. So we had 30 eyes which were successful and 4 eyes underwent failure. BLEB was clinically graded by using IBAX grading scale, and also ASOCT images of BLEB wall reflectivity was done at 1 month postoperatively. So this is the standard reference photograph according to which clinical BLEB grading was done, taking into consideration the height, extent, vascularity, and the Seidel test. BLEB wall imaging was done using the Fourier domain RT-View ASOCT with CAML cornea lens adapter. We noted 7 eyes with uniform reflectivity and 27 eyes with multiform reflectivity, of which it had sub-patterns like 9 eyes only with microcysts, 11 eyes microcysts combined with subconjunctival separation, and 7 eyes in which microcysts were found in multiple layers. So the first picture is that of a uniform reflectivity, where there is a uniform hyperreflectivity and there were no defined hypofluorescent cyst-like spaces present within the BLEB wall. And the second picture is that of showing hypofluorescent cyst-like spaces in the BLEB wall, which comes under the category microcysts only. So here we see microcysts with subconjunctival separation, and here in this below picture, microcysts are present in multiple layers. The mean IOP was about 20 millimeters of mercury measured at 6-month postoperative period in BLEBs with uniform pattern, and was about 12.8 mm in BLEBs with multiform pattern, which was statistically significant. Among the subtypes of the multiform pattern, we found microcysts with multiple layers and microcysts with subconjunctival separation with an average IOP of about 12.3 to 12.7 millimeters of mercury at 6-month postoperative period, which was highly significant. And correlating between the ASOCT morphology and the surgical outcome, we found 100% surgical success in BLEBs with microcysts with multiple layers and in BLEBs with microcysts and subconjunctival separation. We concluded that we found multiform pattern had 20 times more surgical success when compared with uniform pattern, indicating that early BLEB morphology imaging can predict the outcome of the surgery. So when the clinical grading and the ASOCT imaging was compared, we found significant association between vascularity of the clinical BLEB grading and the ASOCT BLEB image of walls. We found BLEBs with multiform reflectivity pattern to have avascular pattern, whereas vascularity was seen in uniform pattern. Other parameters like BLEB height, BLEB extent, and Seidel leakage had no significant correlation. So this is the vascularity grading, where all the 7 eyes with uniform pattern had some amount of vascularity. In conclusion, BLEBs which were avascular by clinical grading and BLEBs which had multiform reflectivity in ASOCT imaging had successful surgical outcome. So the take-home message is that early BLEB wall patterns by ASOCT were able to predict the outcome of the surgery, where multiform BLEB were predictive of successful outcome and uniform BLEB wall had was predictive of towards failing BLEB. So necessitating early and timely intervention like needling with 5-fluorouracil. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Padmapriya. Thank you. So, any question from the judges? Ma'am, Dr. Kirti Singh, Dr. Mayuri, ma'am.
So can we sum up as there is no other presentation?
Yes, ma'am. So we have finished well in time, and the time was 9:25, and we have finished much before that, and which is it's a credit to the speakers as well as the people who are